Greetings, one and all, to the most cursed, most cringiest corner of the internet. A YouTube channel content creator actively alienating everyone in both the analog and digital world. Welcome and good evening, you wonderful dice of all alignments. I am Lunar D8, your soon-to-be streamer who doesn't stream. We are continuing to read The Tragedy of X by Ellery Queen. Act 2, Scene 6, Weehawken, Thursday, September 10th, 2 p.m. Inspector Thum stepped off the ferry in Weehawken, looked about and nodded curtly to a New Jersey policeman who, lounging on guard near the entranceway to the deserted Mohawk, had snapped erect in salute, and strode through the ferry waiting room out into the open. He crossed the cobbled approach to the ferry and began to climb the steep hill which led from the wharves and piers to the top of the precipitous cliffs buttressing the waterfront. Automobiles crept by, feeling their way down the incline as he toiled upwards. He turned and studied below him an ever-widening panorama of the river and the turreted city beyond. Then he resumed his ascent. At the top, he approached a traffic officer, and in his gruff baritone inquired the way to the boulevard. He continued on foot across the wide drive and through quiet, shabby old tree-shaded streets until he reached a busy intersection, which proved to be the thoroughfare he sought. He turned north. He found finally the house which was his destination, number 2075. It was a wooden frame building squeezed between a dairy and an automobile accessories store, ill-painted, crumbling, beaten out of shape by the slow blows of time. There was a sagging porch equipped with 3 ancient rockers and a tottery bench. A mat before the door welcomed visitors in faded script. A yellow sign on one of the porch posts pathetically announced "Rooms for Gentlemen." Inspector Thum looked up and down the street, pulled his coat straight, settled his hat more firmly on his head, and mounted the creaky steps. He pressed a bell marked "Housekeeper." There was a faint jangle from the recesses of this battered hive, and the shuffle of carpet slippers. The door stirred inward, and a carbuncular nose protruded from the crack. "What d'ye want?" demanded a peevish female's voice. Then a deep gasp, a titter, and the door swung inward, revealing a stoutish, middle-aged woman in a frumpy house dress, a lady as ramshackle as her establishment. "It's the police, gentlemen." "Come in, Inspector Thum, come in. I'm so sorry, I didn't know," she babbled excitedly as she attempted to smile, succeeding only in producing a fanged smirk. Standing aside, bobbing, twittering, she allowed the inspector entrance to her tomb. "We've had the awfulest time," she was chattering. "Reporter men and men with big cameras all over the place all morning. Anybody upstairs, madam?" demanded Thum. "And he sure is, Inspector. He's still there, cluttering up my carpets with his cigarette ashes," the woman shrilled. "I had my picture took 4 times this morning, and were you wanting to see that poor man's room again, sir?" "Take me upstairs," Thum growled. "Yes, sir." The old shrew smirked again, lifted her bedraggled skirt delicately with 2 worn fingers, and waddled up a flight of thinly carpeted stairs. Thum grunted and followed. A bulldogish sort of man confronted them on the top step. "Who's that, Mrs. Murphy?" he asked, peering down in the half-light. "All right, keep your shirt on. It's me," snapped the inspector. The man brightened. He grinned. "Didn't see you good at first. Glad you're here, Inspector. Dull work. Anything stirring since last night?" "Not a thing." He led the way along the first-floor hall to a rear room, Landlady Murphy shuffling behind. Thum stopped at the open door. The room was small and bare. There were cracks in the discolored ceiling. The walls were stained with age. A threadbare carpet covered the floor. The furniture was dilapidated. The plumbing of an open washstand was antiquated. The chintz curtain of the single window had seen fresher days, but there was a clean smell about the room, and it seemed well enough tended. An old-fashioned iron bedstead, a chest of drawers standing higher on one side than the other, a heavy little table with a marble top, a wire-braced chair, and a clothes closet comprised the furnishings. The inspector stepped inside and without hesitation walked over to the closet and opened the double doors. Inside, carefully hung, were 3 worn men's suits, 2 pairs of shoes, one fairly new and the other with turned-up toes, lay on the closet floor, and on an upper shelf were a straw hat and a paper bag, and a felt hat whose silk band was stained with dried perspiration. Thum swiftly went through the pockets of the suits, searched the shoes and hats, but seemed to discover nothing of interest. His heavy brows contracted as if he were disappointed in his search, and he closed the closet doors. "You're sure," he muttered to the detective, who stood in the doorway beside Mrs. Murphy watching him, "that nobody touched anything in here since last night?" The detective shook his head. "When I'm on duty, I'm on duty, Inspector. It's just as you left it." On the carpet beside the closet was a cheap brown handbag, its handle broken, dangling by one end. The inspector opened the bag. It was empty. He crossed to the bureau and went through its stiff, heavy drawers. The bureau contained a few suits of old but clean underwear, a pile of laundered handkerchiefs, a half-dozen soft-collared striped shirts, a few crumpled neckties, and clean socks rolled into balls. Thum turned from the bureau. Despite the chill outdoors, the room was close, and he dabbed cautiously at his beet-red face with a silk handkerchief. He stood squarely in the center of the room, legs apart, and frowned a pout. Then he went to the marble-topped table. A bottle of ink, a clotted pen, and a cheap pad of ruled notebook paper he ignored, but he picked up a cardboard package of Royal Bengal cigars and investigated its interior inquisitively. Only one cigar, which crumbled between his fingers, and was in the package. Thum put the package down, the frown deepening between his eyes, and surveyed the room again. Above the washstand in a corner was a shelf with several articles on it. The inspector strode across the room and stared down at the shelf. A dented alarm clock, which had run down and stopped, a quarter-full pint flask of rye whiskey. Thum took the cork out and sniffed hard in a glass, a toothbrush, a tarnished metal shaving case, and a few other ordinary toilet articles, a small bottle of aspirin, an old copper ashtray. The inspector picked out of the ashtray the fragment of a smoked cigar, examined a torn cigar label lying in the ashes. It was from a Cremo. Thum swung about thoughtfully. Mrs. Murphy's malicious little eyes had followed the inspector's movements with rapt attention. She said suddenly in her nasal voice, "You'll excuse the condition of the room, Inspector. This man here wouldn't let me tidy it up." "Yes, yes," said Thum. Then he halted abruptly and eyed the landlady with a flicker of interest. "By the way, Mrs. Murphy, did Wood ever have women visit him here?" Mrs. Murphy snorted, elevating her pimply chin. "If ye weren't a policeman, Inspector, I'd bash ye over the head for that, I tell you. Of course not. This is a respectable house, and everybody knows it." "Yes, 'cause how dare he want to ever date anyone?" "I always tell my roomers that the very first thing, no lady friends, Colin," I says, polite but firm. "No nonsense or monkey business at Mrs. Murphy's." So, I mean, this is just your average dude in the past, and he's basically living like a fucking serf. It's like, hey, here's your basic quarters. Like, it's like modern day halfway house. It's like, yeah, how dare you try to date anyone? At this point, it sounds more like somebody on probation from prison than someone living a life that would be happy in any way. Thum sat down in the room's office, one chair. "So no women came here. Well, how about relatives? Any sisters who might have come here?" "Now, as to that," replied Mrs. Murphy smartly, "I can't blame a man for having a sister, you see. Some of my roomers have sisters visiting them. And aunts, too, and cousins. I don't believe this for a fucking second." but I don't think Mr. Wood did. You see, I always considered Mr. Wood my star roomer. Been with me 5 years, and never gave no trouble. So quiet, so polite, such a gentleman. Never had no visitors, far as I could see. This sounds more like he was an inmate who had to pay for his own cell. Having a respectable job. But then we didn't see him much. He worked from afternoon till night on the streetcar in New York. Course, I don't run a boarding house. My roomers eat out, so I don't know about his meals. But I'll say this for the poor soul. He paid me regular, didn't bother me. Never got drunk, hardly ever knew he was in the house. Seems like I... But Inspector Thum had risen from the chair and turned his thick back upon her. She stopped short in the middle of a sentence, blinked her Batration? I've never seen that word before. Eyelids several times, then glared, sniffed, and flounced past the detective out of the room. And what a hellcat she is, remarked the man against the jam. I've seen rooming houses before that allowed sisters, aunts, and cousins. He chuckled baldly. But Thum was paying no attention. He was pacing off the floor, slowly feeling along the skeleton carpet with one foot. A slight elevation in the flooring at one point near the border of the carpet seemed to interest him. He stripped back the carpet and found merely a badly warped board. Then he came to the bed. He hesitated, but he dropped heavily to his knees, crawled underneath, feeling about like a blind man. The detective said, "Here, Chief, let me help you." But Thum did not reply. He was tugging at the carpet. The detective sprawled on his belly and sprayed the beams of a pocket flashlight on the area beneath the bed. Thum muttered with elations, "Here it is." The detective ripped away the carpet corner, and Thum pounced on a thin, yellow-covered little book. Both men crawled out from under the bed, rather the worse for wear, choking and pounding the dust in their clothes. "Bank book, Chief?" But the inspector did not reply. He was swiftly turning pages. The book tabulated numerous small deposits of a savings account several years old. There had never been a withdrawal. No deposit had been for more than $10. And the majority were for $5. The last entry showed a balance of $945.63. In the center spread of the bank book was a neatly folded $5 bill, obviously a last deposit which Charles Wood had been prevented by death from making. Thum pocketed the bank book and turned to the detective. "When do you go off duty?" "8 bells. Relief comes on at the time." "Tell you what, Thum Scout, tomorrow about 2:30, call me at headquarters. Remind me that I've got something special for you to do here. Get me?" "I get you. Phone at 2:30. Prompt I will." Inspector Thum strode from the room, descended the stairs, which squealed like porkers at every step, and left the house. Mrs. Murphy was energetically sweeping the porch. She flung herself out of his path, and with her carbuncular nose indignantly sniffing in a cloud of dust. On the sidewalk, Thum referred to the cover of the bank book locked about, then crossed the boulevard and walked south. 3 blocks away, he found the building he was seeking, a small business bank in pretentious marble. The inspector entered and made his way to the cashier's cage, marked S to Z. The cashier, an oldish man, looked up. "You, the regular man on the window?" demanded Thum. "Yes, sir. What can I do for you?" "You've probably read about the murder of a man named Charles Wood, a streetcar conductor who lived in this neighborhood." The cashier nodded at once. "Well, I'm Inspector Thum of the homicide squad across the river, in charge of the case." "Oh," the cashier seemed impressed. "Wood was a depositor here, Inspector. If that's what you're after, I recognized his picture in the papers this morning." Thum took Wood's bank book from his pocket. "Now, Mr." He glanced at the metal name in the grilled window. "Mr. Ashley. How long have you been on this window?" 8 years. "Serve Wood regularly?" "Yes, sir. I see by this bank book that he made a deposit once a week. The days of the week vary, but you might tell me whatever you can remember about his banking here." "There isn't much to tell, Inspector. Mr. Wood came in, as you say, steadily once every week without missing a week as far back as I can remember. Practically always came in at the same time, same day. 1 or 2 o'clock. I suppose just before he went back to the New York for duty. Judging from the newspaper report, Inspector Thum frowned. As far as you can recall, did he always make his own deposits? I am particularly interested in that. Was he always alone? I can't remember ever seeing him with anyone. Thanks. Thum left the bank and made his way back along the boulevard to the immediate vicinity of Mrs. Murphy's rooming house. 3 doors from the dairy there was a stationery store. Thum went in. The proprietor, a sleepy old man, oozed forward. Did you know the man Charles Wood who lived in Mrs. Murphy's up the street and was murdered last night on the ferry boat? The old man blinked excitedly. Oh, yes, yes. He was a customer of mine. He bought cigars and papers here. What kind of cigars did he buy? Cremos, Royal Bengals. Those 2 mostly. How often did he come in here? Pretty near every day, right past noon before going to work. Every day almost, hey? Ever see him with anybody else? Oh no, he was always alone. Did he buy stationery here too? Yes, once in a great while, some paper and ink. Thum began to button his coat. How long has he been coming in here? The proprietor scratched his dirty white poll. 4, 5 years, I guess? Say, you ain't a reporter, are you? But Thum merely walked out. He pushed on the sidewalk, espying a haberdashery a few doors away. He clumped over and into it. He discovered only that Wood had bought a few items of menswear over a long period of time. No, Wood always came in alone. The inspector emerged, scowling more deeply than ever, and in turn visited a cleaning and dyeing establishment, a shoe repair shop, a shoe store, a restaurant, and a drug store in the neighborhood. All the tradesmen remembered the man as a customer of small but steady patronage over a period of several years, but he had never been accompanied by anyone, not even in the restaurant. In the drug store, Thum had made additional inquiries. The pharmacist did not recall ever having filled a prescription for medicine on Wood's request, remarking that it was possible that Wood, if he had ever been ill and received a prescription for some physician, might have had it filled in New York. At Thum's command, the pharmacist wrote out a list of 11 physicians in the vicinity and 3 dentists, all within a radius of 5 blocks. The inspector visited each in turn. At each doctor's office, he made the same statement and asked the same questions. You have probably read that a man, Charles Wood, 42nd Street crosstown conductor, was murdered last night on the Weehawken ferry. He lives in this neighborhood. I am Inspector Thum. I am investigating his background, trying to find someone who knows something about his personal life, possible friends, visitors. Did Wood ever come to you for medical treatment, or have you called to his rooming house when he was ill? 4 physicians had not read about the murder and did not know the man even by hearsay. 7 had read the newspaper but not treated Wood and knew nothing about him. The inspector, jaw tight, commenced a round of the 3 dentists on his list. In the first, to his increasing annoyance, he was compelled to wait 35 minutes before he could see the dental surgeon, and when finally Thum did corner the man in his laboratory, the dentist in his laboratory refused to answer questions before seeing his visitor's credentials. The light of hope in his eyes, Thum squared himself and roared the man into compliance. The light died away when the man's ultimately grudging statement indicated a total ignorance of Charles Wood. Neither of the 2 remaining dentists had ever heard of the dead man. Sighing, Inspector Thum trudged back to the wide drive at the top of the hill, descended the winding ramp which led to the ferries, and re-embarked for the New York side. New York. In the city, Inspector Thum proceeded immediately to the executive offices of the 3rd Avenue Railway System, plowing through traffic with a look of pained abstraction on his ugly face. In the edifice, the house housed the personnel department. He inquired for the personnel manager and was ushered into a large office. The personnel manager was a hard-looking man with worry lines etched deep into his face. He hurried forward at once, hand outstretched. Inspector Thum, he asked eagerly. Thum grunted. Sit down, Inspector. The manager pulled a dusty chair forward and fairly thrust Thum into it. I suppose it's about Charlie Wood. Too bad, too bad. He sat down behind his desk and decapitated a cigar. Thum appraised him coldly. Checking up on the dead man, growled Thum. Yes, yes, terrible thing. Can't understand it. Charlie Wood was one of my best men. Quiet, steady, reliable, perfect employee. So he never made trouble. Hey, Mr. Klopf? The manager leaned forward earnestly. I'll tell you something, Inspector. That man was a jewel. Never got drunk on duty. Everybody liked him in the office here. Neat in his reports. One of our honor men. In fact, due for a bigger job. An inspector's job. After 5 years of the best kind of service. Yes, sir. Regular little Floyd Fauntleroy. Hey, Mr. Klopf? I wouldn't say that, Inspector Thune replied Clough hastily, but I'm just saying we could depend on him. You want a certificate of character, don't you? That poor fellow worked every working day since he took over the job. He was anxious to make good, I'm telling you. We gave him every chance, too. That's the motto of our company, Inspector. When a man shows that he wants to get ahead, we push him. Thune grunted. I'm telling you, Inspector, he never took time off. He never took a vacation. Always preferred to work out his vacation time and earn double pay. Why, we're always getting requests from motormen and conductors for pay advances. But Charlie Wood, not him, Inspector, not him, saved his money, showed me his bank book once. How long had he worked for his company? 5 years. Here, I'll check that up. Klopp jumped up and ran to the door. He stuck his head out and yelled, Hey, John, bring me Charlie Wood's record sheet. He walked back to his desk in a moment, a long sheet of paper in his hand. Thune leaned over the desk, propped on his elbows, reading the record. There, you see, said Klopp, pointing. He came with us a little over 5 years ago, starting on the 3rd Avenue run of the East Side, was transferred with Pat Guinness as motorman at his own request to the Crosstown 3.5 years ago, lived in Weehawken and wanted a more convenient run. See that? Not a black mark against him. Thune looked thoughtful. See here, Clough, what about his personal life? Know anything about it? Friends, relatives, pals? Clough shook his head. Well, I wouldn't know much about that, but I don't think so from what I've heard. He was chummy with the men, but he never went out with them. As far as I know, I guess the closest thing to a friend he had was Pat Guinness. Here, just a minute. He turned the record over. See that record of his application next to Ken? None. I guess that sort of answers the question, Inspector. I wish I could be sure, muttered Thune. Maybe Guinness? Never mind, I'll see Guinness myself if it's necessary. Thune picked up his fedora. Well, I guess that's all. Thanks, old man. The personnel manager pumped Thune's arm effusively, accompanied him out of the office and building, reiterating offers of cooperation. Thune cut him off sharply, nodded in farewell, and then turned the corner. He stood there, as if waiting for someone, consulting his watch frequently. 10 minutes passed before a long, black Lincoln limousine with drawn curtains rolled up to the curb before him. In the front seat was a lean, grinning young man in livery who snapped on his emergency brake, jumped out and yanked the rear door open, and stood aside, still grinning. Inspector Thune glanced quickly up and down to the street, and then he climbed into the automobile. Crouched in a corner, more gnome-like than ever, was old Quasey, dozing serenely. The chauffeur closed the door, pounced on his seat, and the car purred off into traffic. Quasey opened his eyes, popped awake. He saw Inspector Thune, a very thoughtful Inspector Thune, sitting utterly still beside him. Quasey's gargoyle of a face suddenly dripped with smiles, and he stooped to open a compartment built into the floor of the car. He sat up a little red, holding a large metal box, the cover of which inside was a mirror. Inspector Thune shook his broad shoulders. A good day's work, Quasey. All things considered, he said. Mr. Lane, I believe what you've done is illegal. You're not allowed to impersonate an officer. There are rules against that. Whereupon he took off his hat, dipped his hand into the box, rummaged, and came up with something. He began vigorously to attack his face with a creamy liquid. Quasey held the mirror before him, offered a small cloth. The inspector scrubbed his shining face with the cloth, and lo, when the cloth came away, Inspector Thune had disappeared. Not completely, perhaps, for shreds of a putty-like substance still clung to his features, but the disguise was sufficiently obliterated to reveal the clean, sharp, smiling physiognomy of Mr. Drury Lane.